Assassin's Creed Shadows has been nothing short of several nuclear bombs of information going off at alarming rates these past couple of weeks. Every time information leaks about this game, things just seem to get even worse for Ubisoft, so let's talk about it. I've covered this topic heavily on this channel because, as a big fan of the series who's played pretty much every game within it, apart from some of those side-scroller ones, I have had a really strong connection to this series for a very long time. Despite the varying qualities of the franchise, I kind of considered Assassin's Creed to be my guilty pleasure when it came to video games. Some people play the new Call of Duty every year, even though it's pretty much the same thing every single time. That's kind of how I look and act with Assassin's Creed. Yeah, I know I'll be climbing stuff and stabbing dudes in the neck probably, but the historical settings are always what gets me. I guess I'm just a sucker for seeing history and being able to interact with it. And Japan's been a big place for fans who want to explore that within Assassin's Creed for years, and obviously this latest installment is not going well for Ubisoft. Now there's more info. So Shohei Kondo, a mutual of the channel, is a Japanese man who's been covering this game as well. He's been getting a lot of flack from fans of Assassin's Creed for his content. Recently, he also talked to an Ubisoft insider about the game and had some things confirmed. The first bombshell this insider confirmed, which funnily enough coincides with what my multiple insiders have told me too, is that Yasuke's content was indeed being erased from the game but also being altered heavily prior to release. The first part of what this insider said stated that the first delay of the game was partly to address historical accuracy. Because of course, as it was rightfully criticized heavily, there were many mistakes when it came to how Shadows portrayed Japan compared to other games within the same franchise. However, the part that caught me was where this insider confirmed that they were concealing major mistakes in Yasuke's storyline, and that internally Ubisoft's developers were panicking and spooked by how the internet has responded to their utter complete lack of dedication to how they've handled this particular part of the story. The insider also confirmed that Ubisoft has taken action to re-record lines for Yasuke in particular when it came to how his character was portrayed, and there have been entire cinematics that were being edited to fix the glaring issues with Yasuke in-game specifically. The insider confirms that Ubisoft has heard the problems and are trying to fix them, but they can only do so much that can be done before the game launches inevitably on March 20th, which is when this will all explode even further for obvious reasons. The insider showed remorse to Shohei Kondo during their interview, stating that they were very upset that Ubisoft did not hire the proper talent needed to give a game of this size and scope the experienced hands that it required to ensure that it wouldn't fail or be attacked. And that this employee, at least, is ashamed by what Ubisoft has allowed to spread beyond into the entire internet due to their own hubris and mistakes. The insider claimed that Ubisoft failed to understand how poorly these decisions would be seen and the effect their choices would have on cultural incidents. They also stated that one of the parts that made them embarrassed the most was, in their own words, the fact that they secretly hid and fixed the worst mistakes before release, meaning that there were even more egregious problems that we haven't been shown that have been allegedly fixed, but we'll have to see. The insider also admits they do in fact believe that Ubisoft 100% deserved the backlash that was given to them for Shadows. This employee also blasts Ubisoft for adding things like limb dismemberment and even beheadings in Shadows, not realizing how poorly this would come across for their Japanese-era game. Since in case you don't know, things like limb dismemberment of human beings is not really allowed. It is in some games, but in most Japanese games released within Japan proper, they are usually banned from doing this. Some games can get around this, say like Ninja Gaiden, if the enemies are getting dismembered, but of course they're not human, but demons or monsters instead. But in that case, the dismembering is seen as not egregious because obviously what is being massacred with a weapon is not a human being. But with Shadows, we can obviously see, as I have to gray out this footage due to how much blood is in it, and YouTube will 100% age restrict my video if I let all of this red blood just splatter and spur. Just look at the screen, man, and how it's depicted in game. It would be problematic for Japan because it's literally a game where you can play a foreigner in a foreign land that is massacring their people with their own weapons, and the people you kill are not demons or being controlled by a virus like in, say, Resident Evil. They're just Japanese people, soldiers for the most part, being ordered by their lords to protect them. So you can tell why this comes across as exceedingly problematic for Japanese people specifically. Like, look at all this blood, man. My god, I'm sorry that I have to gray out so much of this footage, by the way. I really hope when this game launches, they give Shadows the same option they eventually brought to Valhalla, but much earlier on, which is to just turn off the blood entirely, because otherwise, when this game comes out, so many videos are going to be age restricted due to how much needless gore is in this game. This insider also criticizes Ubisoft, claiming that they did not care or take the necessary precautions during the age rating stage, which is done alongside Zero, which is a rating system to determine whether a game is rated E for everyone, teen, etc. Shadows, according to this insider, should have done all their preliminary ratings 6 to 8 months prior to the game's original release date, which, by the way, was November 2024. But they claim that Ubisoft instead refused to offer enough concrete examples to the rating system to dictate what the game's rating would be ultimately, especially in Japan. The insider then stated that a major pushback for Shadow's restrictions in Japan was that the dismemberment system was not only allowed to be performed on enemy soldiers, but also priestesses and innocent women villagers in general. Which means, yes, that Yasuke, or I guess Naoe too, can just walk around and behead literal religious figures without punity, and Ubisoft looked at that and allowed this to happen, knowing full well what it would mean for their rating and how the game would be perceived by Japanese players. Then the insider tells Shohei that internally employees were very concerned with the depiction of innocent people in Shadows, and how Yasuke specifically was able to massacre them would be seen by players worldwide, they stated one point. They were afraid of being accused of racism in this very DEI-driven society, which is a valid concern, because it's incredible how the gaming industry, especially the journalists, have conveniently refused to ridicule Ubisoft for their very obvious attempt at infusing DEI into this game and using it as a bludgeoning tool to make their game work. The entire thing is a mess. But it is pathetic how these media types refuse to challenge Ubisoft simply because Yasuke is a black guy. But the color of a character's skin should never be a reason to be okay with overtly racist depictions like this. I really hate how the industry has collectively said that things like Resident Evil 5 is bad because you shoot black zombies. But cutting down an innocent Japanese woman with a literal katana is totally fine. Where's the articles about this blatant racism from IGN? Of course, they'll ignore it, like they always do, for convenience sake. Shohei Kondo believes the only way to ensure something like Shadows doesn't happen again in the future is to simply ensure that the game fails. Because if the game were to do well, and I mean, it is an Assassin's Creed after all, and I am sure that despite everything that's happening, the game will find a player base because even though there are historical inaccuracies and controversies, these sorts of games still sell regardless of quality. To support my point, look at this article from 2014, 11 years ago, when Unity launched to scathing reception. Despite the game running like slop for everybody and being borderline unplayable for most, Unity still sold almost 2 million copies in its first week of release. And this was the sales numbers after people knew about how buggy and broken the game was due to the reviews and overall impressions of the game. So almost 2 million in sales despite players being told plenty beforehand that hey, this game doesn't run well, it will crash, and will probably corrupt your save file, but the brand was so strong during this time that people still bought it anyways. Now of course, following Unity's release, which was arguably very bad, Ubisoft had to fix the game, and then the next release, which was Syndicate, suffered greatly in sales as jaded fans didn't want to support Assassin's Creed due to how badly they got burned with Unity at launch. And seen here from Eurogamer, back in 2015 when Syndicate launched, the game's first week sales were much weaker than Unity's. However, according to their CEO, the second week of Syndicate sales ended up outperforming Unity due to positive word of mouth because the game was nowhere near as badly optimized compared to Unity. According to their CEO, when it came to how Syndicate sold, it had a similar release to Black Flag, if you can believe it. Which, by the way, that is still the best-selling Assassin's Creed game of all time. Syndicate, however, didn't sell at the same level overall as Black Flag, of course, in the end. But the point remains that regardless of things like graphical issues or save files corrupting or whatever other problems that may arise, that Assassin's Creed, as a brand, it just sells no matter what. After all, Valhalla, has made Ubisoft over $1 billion in profit since its release in 2020, and by the way, this article that I'm referencing, this one came out in 2022. So by now, Valhalla's probably made even more, but Ubisoft claims that the massive revenue spike is due to the continued support for Valhalla post-launch. And as someone who played Valhalla, and all of its expansions, the game is bloated for sure. I found a lot of it to be pretty forgettable. But I guess if you want a game that just sort of eats up your time and gives you content per dollar if you care about that sort of thing, then yeah, I guess Valhalla is worth it in that sense. Thankfully, that game did come out during COVID. So I, like many of you, were locked down and hadn't really started YouTube yet either, so I pretty much just no-lifed that game for like 2 weeks straight. But the point here is that despite the Shadows backlash, I do in fact believe that the game will still sell to a degree. I expect 1 million copies at least within a week is what I'm gonna guess, which by Ubisoft standards is actually still very bad for the series. But we also need to realize that Shadows is not exactly releasing when the Ubisoft or Assassin's Creed brand is at its strongest anymore, and rightfully so. So while Unity could sell almost 2 million despite the issues, these days, it's a different story. For example, Star Wars Outlaws, another flop, couldn't save itself despite being attached to such an important IP. Realistically, had Outlaws came out and it was like back in say 2016 or maybe even 2017 when the sequel trilogy was still coming out, I could almost guarantee you that the same game would have sold 10 million copies despite its qualities, but instead Outlaws was a massive failure for Ubisoft. Because obviously it came out post-trilogy when the apathy for Star Wars was at a record high. In my personal opinion, I think you're going to see a similar result with Shadows. The brand is strong, like Star Wars is absolutely. But let's be real, both of these franchises have been lessened and ruined by 1 million smaller issues that have capsized the whole ship, so to speak. To put this into perspective for you, Valhalla has made about $1 billion or more, and Ubisoft right now is barely even worth much more than what Valhalla has made in lifetime sales as a company. You see what I mean? How poorly things can go so quickly? It's a tale as old as time. Shohei Kondo would then ask the insider why Ubisoft has had such catastrophic results in the last couple of years. The insider says it comes down to 2 specific reasons. Number 1 is the dramatic decrease in the quality of product. And if you've played any of Ubisoft's mainline games the past few years, yeah, this definitely rings true. Their games are the epitome of copy and paste with minimal changes. I mean, Far Cry is still the same game since Far Cry 3. They have just been shilling that same formula to a T for all of the titles since then. There's no iteration in these franchises. I guess Assassin's Creed's biggest change in the last recent few years, was the RPG elements. But in terms of the climbing and such, that has never been more worse than ever. I mean, Unity is an 11-year-old game right now, and yet it still has the best parkour climbing system in that franchise's entire history. Yet you can't engage with those systems in Unity in, say, Valhalla or Odyssey because they took away all the complexity and just replaced it with bargain bin simple gameplay instead. The other reason this insider claims is that Ubisoft simply is not a quality publisher or developer anymore. They say just go look at the Metacritic scores for Ubisoft's games a decade ago compared to now. It'll tell you everything you need to know. They rarely have anything that is met with the universal acclaim, and that means like 90% or above, outside of maybe the Rayman games. Which they haven't made a new one in forever, by the way, for no other reason than because they can't really slap a battle pass or cosmetic shop onto Rayman. But I guess the closest we have to a new Rayman is there is one game that is confirmed to be in the exploration phase of development, which means they're not really putting many resources into it yet, but they're instead trying to figure out if there's something they can make there into a proper game. But if you ask me, I wouldn't really hold my breath if you're a Rayman fan, because Ubisoft really only wants to make always online big sellers. I mean, they even killed the Immortals Phoenix Rising sequel despite that game being something at least somewhat unique compared to what Ubisoft has been pushing out for years at this point. People are just tired of slop that looks like it was made by committee and looking to just hit the racial check listing. For an example, look at Project Ethos. That's an upcoming live service third-person shooter game. It got really bad reactions online because, I mean, look at it. It looks dead on arrival. And 2K Games has officially fired the studio head for Ethos after the reception to the game has been nuclear levels of bad. And you likely haven't even heard of this game because when it got announced, everyone took one look at it and went, yeah, this is going to be the next Concord. And I think this is a big reason why Shadows is facing such an uphill battle, because it's also looking to just be designed by committee. The fact that this insider confirmed that Ubisoft has been slicing up and scattering the pieces of Yasuke behind the scenes is very telling. They know they screwed up and they wish they could fix it all completely, but to change the game so definitively would simply result in another year or two at least of development to get it right. And Ubisoft simply cannot afford to wait anymore. And there's the other problem that if they were to remove Yasuke entirely, it would just be seen as a massive blow to the cult-like mentality at other studios as well, that the players have enough power to permanently change things if they voice their opinions enough, and that scares them. But if you ask me, the whole Gamergate 2 thing already confirms that players have that power to begin with. Look at how much slop has failed already. These companies are rightly afraid of the power of the common player now, and it's kinda great to see, I'm not gonna lie. Of course, this misinformation never stops. Just take to Twitter, where you have this profile here called Asian Don, retweeting someone who claims that black people were the original Chinese. Yeah, we've reached the point where Chinese people were actually black all along narrative. Of course, the image is AI too. And we have people who are, funnily enough, called Assassin's Creed Insider who say things like this. I respect Japan, but their society's racism and arrogance are undeniable. They act like being Japanese is some exclusive status while ignoring the uglier parts of their history. The outrage over a black samurai despite historical proof just shows their fragile superiority complex. The audacity to say that I respect Japan and then immediately following that with the word salad where you prove that you know nothing of Japan, that's astounding to me. By the way, Yasuke was never a samurai. Like I said in other videos, all the historical info that Ubisoft based Yasuke on for Shadows was from a guy named Thomas Lockley, who got rightfully exposed for making up the Yasuke story to sell books. The entire thing isn't real. So not only do you not know what you're talking about, but you cling to Assassin's Creed in your name as well and show that you know nothing. Incredible mental gymnastics going on over at Twitter. Then we have user Bunbury Odo who brings up a good point and says, I don't think Japan is asking for special treatment, please correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't Assassin's Creed Mirage very respectful to mosques in Baghdad? Then there's this idiot named Big Flower who decides to answer with, yes it was, but there was no destructibility, it was an old gen game, so it is the same thing. Old gen game you say? By the way, Mirage came out in 2023 on PS5, just like Shadows will too. Bunbury Odo then pushes back, then Big Flower drops this misinformation bomb where he says this. Mirage was made with Valhalla's engine and it released also on the old gen console. Shadows is in fact the first true Assassin's Creed game for next gen consoles, just put your things in order. A new engine. Very interesting. Anyway, here's the engine that Mirage was made on, this guy claims is old, it's called the Anvil engine. Now can you guess what engine was used for Shadows? Alright, it's the exact same engine as Mirage 2. This is why it's important to make sure you get these things right, because now this Big Flower guy just looks like a dumbass for free. Shadows and Mirage were made on the same engine. The reason why you can't destroy historical or religious sites in Mirage is because the game is set in Islam. And Ubisoft knew if they allowed players to desecrate holy Islamic sites, they would be feeling the heat of a billion suns from the Muslim community for showing no care to their culture or society, and it's obvious that they didn't do the same with Japan with Shadows. Any other claim to this is just misinformation in the end. The same engine, the same consoles and PC platforms, Mirage and Shadows are the same. Sure, Shadows may have improvements to the engine, but claiming that Mirage was made on an entirely other thing, you're out of your mind, dude. A simple Google search would tell you that the Anvil engine is an upgraded version of the Scimitar engine, which was originally designed and used all the way back on the original Assassin's Creed game in 2007. It was then renamed and updated countless times through the years until it became the Anvil engine that we know now. None of these Assassin's Creed games, mainline anyway, are made all different. As you can see here, every single mainline Assassin's Creed game, and even stuff like Rainbow Six, For Honor, and stuff like Steep, they were all made on the same Scimitar engine that got updated throughout the years into other variations, until they have eventually become what it is today, which is of course the Anvil engine. So Big Flower is an idiot, and hopefully the next time someone tries to technology-splain you as to why Japan's history can be destroyed, but not others in other games, just know that they're lying. Because companies are well known to use their own in-house engines already. Bethesda has been using the Creation engine for decades. Even Capcom uses the RE engine for games like Resident Evil 7 and 8, as well as Devil May Cry 5, all built on the very same engine. But this Big Flower guy is just delusional. Burry then asks, so Japan is the first entry in the Assassin's Creed franchise, where you are able to smash up religious institutions. Is that the argument you are going with? Because it sounds like Ubisoft is in fact putting extra effort into be disrespectful. Big Flower would then say, "This is probably the worst level of reach I've seen since the game was announced. This is just sad. Blaming on stuff you're not even into only for your own profit and engagement. If there's one thing certain is that everything comes back, especially the harm that has been done." Big Flower, in my professional diagnosis for you, you need to log off the internet, buddy. The best time to stop was right now, because you don't know what you're talking about. My goodness. But circling back to Shohei's leak a bit more, his insider also claims that Ubisoft has an insane turnover rate, which I can confirm based on the many insiders I've spoken to there as well. Another thing that his insider stated was that Ubisoft forces developers who specialize in one thing to stay on that thing in the future. The example given is enemy behavior. If you specialize in that per se, it pretty much just becomes your career at Ubisoft. Not a good example personally, because Ubisoft's enemy behavior is butt cheeks, but whatever, moving on. Ubisoft also forces people to stay on franchises they worked on to ensure a safer pipeline delivery of content. It's a pretty standard idea. You know how to make pizza, so you'll just keep making pizza. There's no point in you learning to make pasta, because this other guy we got over here, he only makes pasta. Same sort of thing. But what this insider ultimately states is that the absolute state of shadows from the lack of historical accuracy, the erasure of Yasuke's content, and the overall quality of the game, it all comes down to the fact that Ubisoft refuses to innovate or allow developers to try new things, and when they do, they usually always cancel these projects anyways, like Immortals 2 or Prince of Persia's Metroidvania revival. Ubisoft has created an atmosphere where things don't feel unique anymore, developers are stifled and forced into behaviors and roles without room to diversify. And this may seem good at first, but ultimately it leads to teams that are full of people who can only do so much because they've been limited and refused to allow to spread their creative wings, so to speak. So this is why the majority of the great devs have all but left Ubisoft already. Why work somewhere if they never let you do what you love and instead just treat you like a number? Unfortunately, they clearly didn't hire any experts in Japanese history either, but they of course knew just who to hire for their DEI programs instead. The insider then expresses how many people within Ubisoft that they know yearn to leave AAA behind to work on smaller, more creative projects instead. The sorts of games that aren't costing multi-million dollars that take 5 to 10 years of their lives to make. But instead they want to make games that maybe last a few hours but take a fraction of the risk involved to create, while also offering hopefully something new over the same thing, old time and again. And the insider admits that in terms of the experiences and qualities of developers at Ubisoft now versus their golden age, which the insider claims would be around Black Flag, which I would agree with, the contrast is stark and clear. The insider also states another thing that has led to Ubisoft's downfall is its complete lack of understanding when it comes to political themes within their games. Many of their recent titles, and even before, they focus on societal collapse, gender identity, and the tired, overused concept of revolution to remove a regime out of power. Go look at any recent Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, or Watch Dogs to see that they are all kind of about the same things. The insider claims that Ubisoft uses these political themes only to fan the flames just enough to bring interest to their games, but not enough to actually say anything of significance, but instead scapegoat it to lead to potential sales. A good example of this is Far Cry 5. People thought it would be this big game about deconstructing conservatism and Republican values, but it was surface level at best. And by the end of the game, it turns out the bad guy was kinda right all along, which likely pissed off liberal games journalists even more. This, coupled with what this insider states later on in the video, that concepts like the Me Too movement pushed Ubisoft to abandon their strong messaging in games and themes in order to play nice, so to speak, and calm these particular crowds of people. But this was only done because, of course, as we know now, Ubisoft has been hit with multiple sexual and harassment lawsuits from within their studios in the years since. It's a classic example of the male feminist archetype. Just convince everyone that you're for the feminist cause, but you're really only doing that to mask the fact that you're actually an evil person who just wants to take advantage of these very same people. It's not right, it's been exposed to plenty. Hell, even recently, go look at the whole Neil Gaiman thing and the Sandman project at Netflix that got cancelled. Because that guy got exposed for sexually harassing plenty of women over the years, and these companies are not mad for any other reason than because they got caught in the act, so to speak, and now they're trying to mask their problems to ensure that people will still want to buy and support their games in the future. But when they can't be consistent and erase content and can't stick by their own principles, whether it's Yasuke or something else, the whole thing just comes tumbling down, as it always has, inevitably so. It's going to be very interesting once Shadows officially releases. But thanks to Shohei Kondo for this insider look. I'll link his video in the description box if you want to watch it yourself. But this insider has confirmed as well that Yasuke has indeed had content erased, and Ubisoft is trying to desperately get back on track after years of incompetence. And all of these bad sales and canceled projects have done nothing but cripple this once proud industry titan. What do you think? Let me know as always in the comments. Thank you for being here. Subscribe. Thanks to my supporters, and I'll see you guys in the next one.